recorded. Yes. And the recording will be posted on MDE's website. Next slide, please. I'm Kathy Stecker. I'm serving as your moderator for today's meeting. The Harry R. Hughes Center for Agroecology is hosting this meeting. Many thanks to them. The recording for today's meeting, along with many other resources, will be posted at the A-StoRM hub at this URL, and you'll see it again and again, and we'll put it in the chat so you won't miss it. Next slide. Welcome to the members of the public who have joined us this morning. You'll remain in listen-only mode throughout the meeting. We encourage you to use the A-StoRM email address, astormcomments.mde@maryland.gov, to send us your questions and comments, and you'll have the opportunity to formally comment on draft regulations during the regular public review process. Next slide. Welcome and thank you to our Stakeholder Consultation Group members. A reminder to please stay muted when you're not speaking. We'll have time for your questions after the presentation. We're going to hold the questions until then. You can type questions into the chat anytime, or you can wait until after the presentation and raise your hand. And the raise hand and the chat can be found at the bottom of your screen. Next slide. You bring diverse experience and skills to the group, so we value your full participation. This meeting is more of an introduction. In the next meeting, we'll go into more detail on some draft regulations. So please, we want to hear from you during the whole process. Next slide. Today's meeting is an orientation for members of the Stakeholder Consultation Group. We'll start with some opening remarks and a presentation from MDE. Then we'll answer your questions. And then we'll let you introduce yourselves and share your interests in participating in this group. By the end of the meeting, everyone should understand the role of the Stakeholder Consultation Group in development of stormwater regulations. Now, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Suzanne Dorsey. I'm sorry if you can hear my cat. Suzanne is MDE's Deputy Secretary and Chair of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. Suzanne, and next slide.
Thanks, Kathy. Appreciate it. And really want to start by thanking the Hughes Center and their incredible role facilitating connections between state government and stakeholders. Your vital role in this issue and many others across the state really makes a difference and helps your state government to establish policies that are guided by the interests of our citizens and support the great outcomes that we're looking for. And you know, we have all experienced over the last couple of years real change in our weather patterns, and that's true whether you're a farmer, whether you're a city planner, or whether you're a small town executive. We're seeing more intense rainfall, and we're seeing differences in water tables throughout our state, and it is becoming a challenge to manage water throughout our state. The changing risk patterns that we have been seeing throughout our state are often associated with affecting vulnerable communities first. So communities that are at risk for flooding are also communities that may be impacted by environmental justice issues. They may be communities that are overburdened by other pollution or environmental burdens. And in addition, we are beginning to tally the economic impact of changing weather patterns on a variety of cost centers throughout the state. That's federal, state, local government, and the pocketbooks of our businesses and our citizens. So there's a sense of urgency with which we approach this. Next slide, please. I see the challenge in front of us, but I also recognize a future where we are protected from flooding and severe weather. I can envision a future, if we work together effectively, that uses scientific and predictive tools to help guide us to build stronger, resilient infrastructure. Models that describe how water moves through a community, both the green filters of a community and the gray filters of a community, and changes that promote equity, that invest in communities that perhaps haven't been invested in enough, and build thriving, equitable communities. That's what you're here to do today, is to help guide the state and to support each other in building a future that is stronger, that is more resilient, that is greener, that is economically viable. And I appreciate so much your participation in this. I appreciate the expertise of our MDE staff, our stormwater engineers, and I hope that together we can forge changes that really make our future brighter. So thank you for your participation, and I'll turn it back to you, Kathy.
Well, we'll go on to the next slide. And Jennifer.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Suzanne. Good morning, everybody. Again, I'd like to thank each of you for volunteering your time today and over the next few months to assist us at MDE with our efforts to advance Maryland's stormwater management regulations. I'm going to take a few minutes at the beginning here, maybe about 10 minutes, to present some background about flooding issues in Maryland and the programs that we have currently in place to address them. And as I go through this, I'm going to raise some questions for you all to consider as well. And then I'm going to turn it over to Ray Barr, who is our Deputy Program Manager for our Stormwater Dam Safety and Flood Management Program. And Ray's going to talk about Senate Bill 227 and proposed stormwater management regulations. I don't think I introduced myself, but let me do that first. My name is Jennifer Smith, as I said, and I am the Program Manager for the Stormwater Dam Safety and Flood Management Program. So again, thank you all for joining us this morning. So let's get right down to it. On this slide here, we have a photo of flooding that occurred in May of 2018 in Catonsville. During this event, 8 to 10 inches of rain fell in 4 hours. And this is the same event that hit Ellicott City at the same time, and also the West Baltimore area. This storm was and has been characterized as a 1,000-year storm. Severe weather events like this one and sea level rise and climate change are contributing to increased flooding that threatens the safety of our communities. Now, flooding can be especially devastating, as Suzanne mentioned, to economically disadvantaged historically neglected communities. Next slide, please. On this slide here, we have a list of some of these recent events, these recent short duration, high intensity rainfall events that we've experienced in Maryland. We've experienced many events with nearly 5 inches or more of rainfall in a very short time frame. They've occurred in all parts of the state, and many of them, or most of them, have resulted in heavy property damage. Now, many of our local jurisdictions have begun to map and characterize these events and have started to prioritize their locations and work on trying to understand why the flooding has been occurring and begun to identify potential solutions. Next slide. So let's talk about why these flooding events are occurring in Maryland and what programs are currently in place to address them. First, I want to look at our development patterns. In Maryland, historical development has occurred where many older in many older urban areas were developed prior to federal and local floodplain management requirements. This historical development occurred along our rivers and in floodplains and where shipping access was generally available. Now, this development along streams and rivers essentially went unchecked until 1968, when the National Flood Insurance Program was created. Maryland now has 147 communities that participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, and all of these communities have local floodplain ordinances. And you may not know this, but Maryland is nationally recognized as one of the most progressive FEMA floodplain mapping programs in the country. We have digital flood insurance rate maps for 21 of the 24 counties in the state. We're working on the last 3 counties. There is a link on this slide, which I think Michelle will put in the chat for us. And this link is to our FEMA digital flood insurance rate map website, if you're interested in looking at those maps and getting more information. Now, it's important to know that FEMA's floodplains are only mapped for watershed areas greater than 1 square mile or 640 acres. So it's the large watersheds that are mapped. However, many of the Maryland's local jurisdictions have started to map local floodplains, the smaller watersheds that are up in the upriver of the FEMA floodplains. It is important also to recognize that FEMA's floodplain maps are based on land cover conditions that existed at the time the map is created. So they do not incorporate the impact of flooding from future land use changes. Changes in the land use after these maps are created may result in more runoff from the 100-year storm, potentially impacting the map floodplains. Next slide, please. So let's look at tidal flooding and sea level rise. Flooding from tidal influences and sea level rise is devastating to Maryland's coastal communities. The photo on this slide shows tidal flooding in Joppa, Maryland, in April of 2020. Tidal influences and sea level rise can result in temporary road closures, overwhelmed drainage systems, and inundated properties. In 2019, Maryland lawmakers recognized the importance of the impacts of tidal flooding and passed a law that requires local jurisdictions experiencing what they termed nuisance flooding to develop a plan to address it. There are now 17 of these nuisance flood plans that have been developed by the local jurisdictions with the help of the Department of Natural Resources. Next slide. The Department of Natural Resources also provides funding for projects and tools for mapping and identifying hazards. One of these tools, developed with MDE's assistance, is the Coast Smart Climate Ready Action Boundary, otherwise known as the CRAB. This tool provides coastal communities with information on the extent of area of projected tidal flooding after a 3-foot elevation is added to the FEMA tidal floodplain. Now, this 3-foot increase is recommended to accommodate future sea level rise. There's a link on this slide to the CRAB tool website, and I think Michelle's going to put that in the chat as well. So if you are interested in finding out more about the CRAB tool, please visit this website. Next slide, please. Okay, outside of tidal areas, flooding does not just occur in the FEMA or the 100-year floodplains, local 100-year floodplains. There is a recent study that was completed by the Pew Charitable Trust that notes that more than 2/3 of flooding events on Maryland's roads and highways takes place outside of the FEMA mapped 100-year floodplains. We should consider whether the size or condition of our existing stormwater conveyance infrastructure, the pipes, the channels, and the culverts, plays a role in the magnitude and extent of flooding in Maryland. Remember, as our urban areas grew over the last 200 years, many of our local creeks and streams and low-lying areas were filled or replaced with closed storm drain pipes and channels. Many of these systems are aging, they're in need of repair, or they're clogged, or they are simply undersized and cannot handle the amount or the intensity of rainfall and runoff draining to them, especially during these flashy, high-intensity storms. So rainfall exceeding the capacity of these drainage systems is then forced to flow over land on the surface, and in many cases into areas not meant for runoff. These areas with undersized pipes and channels can experience what is called urban flooding. And this flooding can be extremely damaging and dangerous, especially if our citizens are not expecting it. Next slide. Now, many point the finger to growth and new development as the cause of flooding, and then focus their solutions entirely on requiring more stringent new development regulations. Since the early 1980s, Maryland's laws and regulations have required stormwater management controls for new development projects. Currently, stormwater management standard for new development is environmental site design to the maximum extent practicable. You might have heard the term ESD to the MEP. This ESD to the MEP, this standard requires the infiltration or slow release of 2.7 inches of rainfall in smaller stormwater management practices like rain gardens that are distributed across a development site. So here's a question for you to think about. What happens to these small ESD practices designed to filter low intensity rainfall during a cloudburst thunderstorm? Can they handle that high intensity rainfall and runoff? Are they able to slowly infiltrate that rainfall, or are they overwhelmed? Think about that as we go through this process. For larger rainfall events, Maryland's regulations also require quantity management for new development projects where flooding is known to be a problem. Quantity management, in this case, is defined as the capture and release of the 2-year or the 10-year storms to the pre-development runoff characteristics. The design criteria for these for quantity management is based on a 24-hour duration storm. These are lighter rainfall, longer duration storms. These criteria are specifically addressing the lower intensity, longer duration storms. The regulations essentially leave it up to the local review agencies to determine where flooding warrants new development quantity management standards. Again, it's where flooding is known to occur. So the regulations essentially leave it up to the local review agencies to determine where flooding warrants new development quantity management controls. So here's another question for you to think about. Where and how is stormwater quantity management required in Maryland? Where is it happening? Where are the local jurisdictions requiring it? And does this match with where flooding events are occurring? Next slide, please. What about the management of the very large extreme storms? Our state stormwater regulations require stormwater quantity management of the 100-year storm for new development projects, but only in the interjurisdictional watersheds of Gwynns Falls, Jones Falls, Herring Run, and Carroll Creek. Again, these criteria are specifically addressing the lower intensity, longer duration storms. So, another question for you to think about. Will any of these existing requirements help address the flooding caused by the high intensity rainfall events that we are now experiencing in Maryland? Next slide. And what should we expect in the future? 3 recent reports point to the climate changing in Maryland. The 2017 National Climate Assessment reports that increases in the frequency and intensity of extreme precipitation events are projected for all U.S. regions. The Chesapeake Bay Stormwater Network recently found multiple studies that show that the climate is not stationary, indicating that the use of our current stormwater management design storms that are based on historic precipitation data are likely to underestimate future precipitation. And according to the Chesapeake Bay Program's climate assessment, the volume of annual rainfall is expected to increase in the Chesapeake Bay watershed by approximately 6.5% by 2055. Next slide. So our climate is changing. A couple other questions to think about. What will these climate predictions mean to our stormwater conveyance systems that are already stressed? Or to the many of those historical properties that I talked about earlier that are currently located in our 100-year floodplains or along the floodplain fringe? Should our stormwater management requirements for new and redevelopment account for future climate projections? should climate change predictions be factored into how we determine our local and FEMA floodplain boundaries? These are all important questions facing us as we consider moving forward regulation changes to address urban flooding in Maryland. Now, I want to turn this over to Ray Barr, who's going to talk about what Maryland's General Assembly has asked MDE to do with your help and where we are currently in the process. Ray?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jennifer. Next slide, please. So as you can see from Jennifer's discussion, there are many and sometimes complex scenarios that are causing more and more flooding in Maryland. This is why the Maryland General Assembly acted in 2021 to pass an update to Maryland's stormwater management law, often referred to as Senate Bill 227. Today, I am going to discuss the nuts and bolts of that law and what it is requiring the department to do. First, MDE was required to outline its process for meeting the law's requirements to the General Assembly by November of 2021. You can see that report on the slide to the right. And this is our playbook, and this should be your playbook as well. It's a valuable resource to you as you consult on the regulation updates. We were also required to identify the most recent precipitation data, investigate flooding events since 2000, and update Maryland's stormwater quantity management regulations both immediately and revise stormwater regulations as necessary, but at least once every 5 years. Next slide, please. The law also required the department to consult with stakeholders. That's why we're here today. And we need to do this at least 6 months prior to any proposed regulatory changes. Right now, we're anticipating proposing regulations in April of 2023. And 6 months prior to that is October of this year. And we're going to bring this group back together with more detailed information on regulation updates. Today's meeting is to get your feet wet with what the department's process has been to date, background information on the state of Maryland's stormwater management programs, and to discuss your role as stakeholder advisors. Next slide, please. In addition to the required stakeholder consultations, MDE has formed numerous in-house and external technical advisory groups, including the involvement of many municipal, county, academic, private, and NGO participants. Much of that good work can be found on a website that we have created specifically for the department's A-StoRM initiative. Michelle's going to place that, somebody's going to place that into your chat function right now, a link to this website. This is your second primary go-to resource for all things A-StoRM as you are consulting on the department's stormwater regulation development. Next slide, please. Okay, first, the department is required to identify the most recent precipitation data. Next slide. The law defines precipitation data as the historical data that describes the relationship between precipitation, intensity, duration, and return period. We call this IDF curves. In stormwater management design, these precipitation data are used as input into various hydrologic models to predict runoff rates and quantities and develop quantity management standards. Maryland's regulations currently require the use of IDF curves based on technical paper 40 that was developed back in 1961 and includes recorded storm events through 1958. TP40 was replaced by the NOAA Atlas 14 in 2004. This document uses record data through December of 2000 and represents the most recent published precipitation data for Maryland. However, Maryland's regulations have not been updated to require Atlas 14 precipitation data. Now, it's something that we have encouraged the local jurisdictions to use in the design of stormwater management, and many of them are using the updated data, but many are not. So this would be a change for some jurisdictions. Maryland has also partnered with other mid-Atlantic states to fund an update to Atlas 14 to include current precipitation records, and this is expected to be out in 2025. Finally, a consortium of universities and the RAND Corporation have published future projected IDF curves for the Chesapeake Bay watershed based on the NOAA Atlas 14 precipitation data. As you will see shortly, MDE is proposing to use these projections to increase ESD to the MEP volume requirements. Next slide. Second, the department is required to investigate flooding events since 2000. The department's main resource for this is a comprehensive storm events database developed by NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information. We were able to capture 2,822 flood events that have occurred in Maryland since the year 2000. In talking with many local officials, these are the data that they often use in the development of their local hazard mitigation plans. They also have additional flood event records that they are sharing with us through the A-StoRM website. Next slide. Finally, the law requires us to update stormwater quantity regulations. And before we talk about changing our regulations, I'd like to provide some context by sharing a brief history of Maryland's stormwater management regulations and where we are today. Next slide. Stormwater runoff from development projects have been regulated in Maryland since 1982, when Maryland's first statewide stormwater management law required 2-year and 10-year peak discharge management. In 2000, the regulations required water quality treatment of the first inch of runoff and stream channel protection. At that time, the quantity management requirements were modified from a statewide mandate to a requirement in areas where the local jurisdiction had a knowledge of flooding events or conveyance problems. And then in 2009, the regulations began requiring ESD to the MEP for quality management, but there was no further requirements for quantity management. Next slide. So what are we proposing? Initially, we are proposing an update of Maryland's stormwater regulations by requiring the use of NOAA Atlas 14 precipitation data. Second, we're proposing to update the ESD to the MEP standards by increasing the required minimum volume by 10%, or going from 2.7 inches to 3 inches of rainfall based on the RAND Corporation's climate change projections. As discussed, this is only the beginning of a larger process of regulatory updates over the next several years. Next slide. So some additional quantity regulations that we are exploring include requiring a statewide quantity management standard like the 2-year and 10-year peak management that we previously had. But this time, what we'd like to do is investigate managing estimated future rainfall discharge rates that are likely to be greater because of climate change back to historical discharge rates so that we can be consistent with the prior conveyance system designs. The A-StoRM report mentioned the state's intent to fund watershed studies for developing site-specific quantity management standards. Why watershed studies? Because watershed studies use models and scenarios to help us characterize unique watershed conditions that can inform us. Next slide, please. On what has happened, for example, why flooding events have occurred in the past. What can happen, for example, where flooding events may occur in the future and where we are vulnerable. And what changes need to happen regarding quantity management to reduce the risk of flooding events from happening in the future. Watershed studies are also going to help us unlock state and federal grants. The BRIC and FMA grant programs are now being funded at historic levels, and they are nationally competitive grant programs. So with these watershed studies that we are proposing, Maryland's grant applications will be of superior quality and have a greater chance of being accepted for these federal funding programs. Now I'm going to invite Kathy Stecker back in as our moderator, and we'd like to open the floor up for discussion, clarifications, or any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Ray. I noticed there's a question in the chat right now, and I'm going to ask Jennifer if she can answer.
Sure. The question is from Karen. Please clarify when the 2025 reg updates occur, what data record and to what year? I think, Karen, you're asking about the precipitation data and possibly about NOAA's efforts ongoing right now. NOAA, as Ray mentioned, is working on an update to Atlas 14 currently. And I know that, we are partnering with other states. I know that we have requested that NOAA include climate change projections into that work. I'm not sure, 100% sure whether that is actually going to happen, but they will be starting, if they haven't already started, they'll be starting very soon, and they would be using data up to 2020, up through 2020 to update NOAA Atlas 14. And again, there may be climate change projections included in that work. So we would take that information and then use it to update our precipitation numbers. As Ray mentioned, our initial updates, however, will include the current NOAA Atlas 14, which I believe goes to 2006 data.
I see a couple of questions on the 10-year quantity management. And this is from Jennifer Ding. For the 10-year quantity management proposal, Ray said volumes would be managed back to historical 10-year volumes. What year or value is considered historical? So the current TP40 has storms up through 1958, and the Atlas 14 is through the year 2000. So jurisdictions are using those data sets, and most jurisdictions size their conveyance systems based on the 10-year storm. So what we would be doing is we'd be taking this new data, the Atlas 14 update that Jennifer just talked about, and this is just an idea. This is what the city of Pittsburgh has done. They have a combined sewer system, and it's reached capacity. So when there's new development, they take the new flows from stormwater and they manage them back to that historical 10-year level. This is the type of additional clarification information that we're going to be presenting to you during the October meeting. We've got a regulatory technical advisory group that's discussing this now and coming up with this information. There was also a second one. Can you elaborate on the 10-year flood management and consistency with down? I think I just addressed that as well.
Okay, well, we've got a hand raised. Chris?
Before you go to Chris, if you don't mind,
okay.
I'd like to just add to what Ray said. The proposals that Ray has presented are very preliminary at this point. Obviously, we have a group of people that we're trying to vet these ideas through before they come to this stakeholder group. So the quantity management one in particular is going to take a lot of time to vet with our regulations technical advisory group. This group is made up of people from the county level review agencies. We also have some consulting engineers in that group as well. So we want to make sure that as prior to us coming to the stakeholder group, that we've gone through a very detailed discussion about consequences, unintended or intended consequences of any proposals that we vet. So while we're putting forth to you today some potentials, they may or may not make it all the way up to the stakeholder group.
And just to add to what Jennifer said, it's very important for those of you that have been in this business for a long time, that we don't propose something hastily and there are unintended consequences of it. I think we all know that the 2-year peak management in the western part of the state actually exacerbated stream channel erosion. And we tried to get away from that in the 2000 updates with stream channel protection and things of that nature. We're probably going to have the precipitation data update and the ESD to the MEP. We kind of call them the low-hanging fruit. Those will probably be our initial regulation updates that are going to be proposed. But remember, this is a long-term process. we'll probably be updating regulations for 2-3 years, and we need to revisit them every 5 years. Some of these larger quantity management issues are going to take us more time. We need to develop the models and test them out to prevent those unintended consequences. So some of this will be proposed later and not part of the initial round of proposals. The second resource that I mentioned, I'm seeing in a chat from Michael Daly, is our A-StoRM hub. Go there. We just put a bunch of more information up on that. It was developed specifically for this initiative. We're working with a lot of local governments, and they're adding a lot of information to that website. It's going to be a really good resource for you and for our local jurisdictions and the citizens of Maryland to keep abreast of what we're doing with A-StoRM.
Great, thanks. And Chris, thank you for your patience. Please unmute and ask your question.
Sure, yes. Good morning. Chris Hine from Carroll County. So you indicated that you're interested in having updated watershed studies performed. And to my knowledge, the historic watershed studies were, because they're cross-jurisdictional, were initiated by and managed by NRCS. And so I was curious what your thoughts were as far as, are you looking to update those reports, and what agency are you looking to take a lead on, because it would involve multiple local jurisdictions?
I can take that one. I'll start it anyway. Thanks, Chris, for that question. So the watershed studies that were mentioned were a common. I don't know how many were done by NRCS. A number of them were done by local jurisdictions and the state government as well, DNR, and they're fairly old, as Ray mentioned. Right now, what we're trying to do is incentivize having watershed studies updated, or even new watershed studies implemented through funding. We're working to try to get FEMA grant funding and state grant funding available to local jurisdictions to actually, perform or work on those watershed studies. We are also looking at potentially, there might be a potential proposal down the road for a regulatory requirement for watershed studies, but that's really long term. So I think that's where we are right now. The local jurisdictions will be doing the watershed studies. Now, if it's a watershed that crosses jurisdictional boundaries, we've also been discussing in-house regional approaches, maybe even a statewide approach to prioritizing watersheds for studies. So all of this is up in the air, Chris. We're kind of in the brainstorming mode at the moment for watershed studies, how to get them implemented, how to do them, what scale to do them on, and whether it should be a statewide approach, state-driven or local jurisdiction-driven.
It looks like we're getting several questions about understanding what managed back to means.
Could we make sure we don't miss any and go back to Karen's question from 937?
Okay.
Since new values will be available in 2025 from NOAA, do you plan to revisit the regs in 2026?
Yes.
Yeah, we're actually required to revisit the regs once every 5 years at a minimum.
Okay, and then from Jen Dininger, many jurisdictions already have watershed plans that allow them to access EPA 319 funding and other sources of funding for stormwater management. The proposed requirement for watershed studies should take these watershed plans into account and align requirements, because jurisdictions will not have time or resources to duplicate those efforts.
Absolutely. Very good point. Thank you, Jennifer.
And then we get back into the manage back to questions, Ray, that I think you were going to.
Yeah. Ray, do you want me to jump in on that one for a minute?
Yeah, I've described it. How about you give it a shot?
Okay. The idea here is that we're managing to what the capacity of the conveyance system can handle. And this is one of the reasons why watershed studies are really important, because you need to understand what the capacity of the system is in order to be able to know what to manage back to. So And this is something that, as Ray said, Virginia Beach has implemented. I think the city of Pittsburgh has also implemented in certain watersheds where they've developed a very detailed hydrologic and hydraulic model of their existing conveyance system, understood what that system can handle, and then provide that information. Actually, Virginia Beach, they provide the models to the development community and ask them to model their impacts or their discharges from post-development conditions to show that their existing system can convey their discharge rates. And if they cannot, then they require the development community to manage to ensure that the conveyance system has the capacity. So I hope that helps a little bit. But again, it points to the need for detailed watershed studies. And if Ray hadn't mentioned earlier, we do understand that when you're talking about doing detailed watershed studies, we're talking about cost, and there's a significant amount of technical data collection effort that would happen. There's a variety of different levels of modeling that could be done. So it's very complicated, and it's not something that we're going to be moving forward with lightly.
Okay, next question. If the ESD to the MEP requirement is raised to 3 inches of treatment, will the accounting guidance then be updated to give extra credit above and beyond that? Currently, it gives extra credit for up to 3 inches from the required 2.7.
So this is an MS4 question, municipal separate storm sewer system. The NPDES, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits to the local municipalities. And it has a guidance document along with it to calculate pollutant reductions and impervious acres restored. And that's where we first featured bumping up the 2.7 to 3 inches to increase the volume in our facilities, more volume, capture more rainfall, and help to prevent some of these flooding events. And the question is, are we going to go beyond that now in the guidance? So a lot of that guidance going from 2.7 to 3 inches was based on the additional water quality reductions that we were going to have. The science about water quality reductions beyond 3 inches is not really there as of yet. So, and the reason why that's important is because those are water quality permits. So we're beginning to transition here from water quality volumes to quantity volumes. I think the next question kind of gets at that as well, where Karen is saying instead of 10%, maybe increase the ESD volume to 20%. And it gets back to Jennifer's question. It's something that we all need to think about. You know, at what point, you know, are these ESD to the MEP structures going to be overwhelmed? And at what point would you possibly need some sort of larger structure? Not that that larger structure couldn't have water quality features in it, but based more on quantity management. These are the types of things, you know, what is the most efficient way to get at quantity management and flood control?
Okay, so I see hands raised and I see a few more questions in the chat. What I'm going to do is call on the hands raised and ask you to maybe be quicker about asking the questions, and hold the questions in the chat, because we're going to move on to introductions then, and then we'll probably have more time afterward to get to more of your questions. So Casey.
Thanks, Kathy. Ray, you started to touch on the question when I raised my hand. I'm struggling a little bit. I think Jennifer's question, as you just pointed out, is relevant, right? As these storm intensities get higher, but durations get shorter, right? To really start to question the effectiveness of ESD facilities sort of in that moment. So I'm kind of struggling with this idea that the first step is, well, let's increase the ESD volume as a reaction to some of these flooding concerns. To me, they don't seem to line up. I feel like where you were headed in terms of looking at sort of more centralized, potentially centralized capture runoff might be more effective. So the question is, why is that sort of the first inclination in terms of a reaction?
That's a great question. anytime you can capture more volume, you're capturing additional rainstorm events. Again, we're in the beginning stages here, and as Jennifer mentioned, we need to run models. What we want to do, hopefully, and the thing about going from 2.7 to 3 inches is we know that we're going to get additional water quality benefits out of that. I kind of characterized it as the low-hanging fruit. It's something that's simple and easy to do. It's practices that we're already putting in, and it's just a 10% increase on that. And we'd like to model that and see what that does for possibly larger quantity management structures as well. You're not alone. The regulation group that's looking at this, that is comprised of many, local governments and other stakeholders, has asked the same question. But we need, like, as Suzanne mentioned, this is, there's a sense of urgency to this. So this is something that we feel that we can move ahead with now, and we'll help out, we'll model it, and we'll see what more is needed in the future.
Let me add to that, and to all the questions, just to let you all know that in our next meeting, we will be doing a detailed presentation on both the precipitation, recommended precipitation regulation changes and the ESD volume change. So you will see a lot of the what has gone into the discussions at the regulatory technical advisory group. You'll see that information presented to you, the pros and cons, the what ifs. If we do this, what are the impacts? You're going to see all that. We want to make sure that you all have the background information before you make your decisions. We want to make sure that you have all the information that we have. But right now we're in the information gathering stages. But these, and as Ray said, these two ideas are simple. However, as you pointed out, Casey, they're almost, it's really difficult to do one or the other or any of these isolated. They have impacts to other requirements. And one other thing I want to point out is that the increase in the ESD volume from 2.7 inches to 3 inches. I don't think Ray mentioned this, and right now this isn't something that this will be something that we'll discuss in the next meeting. But there is this minimum 1 inch volume in an ESD practice, and the remaining volume can be put into a Chapter 3 quantity management practice. So there's a lot that goes into just, it looks easy, it looks simple when you put it out in one sentence, but there's a lot behind it. The other thing that's behind that we'll bring up is how the volume in each practice is measured, whether we're taking into account the voids in the media, or we're making sure all that volume is on the top of the structure. There's a lot of detail that goes behind each one of these requirements. And so I just want to make sure that that we're going to be presenting all that detail to you in the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. And I'd ask you, Karen, to keep your hand raised so you don't lose your place, but I think we need to move on to make sure we get to the introduction. So next slide. Now it's time for group members to introduce themselves. I hope you'll all turn your cameras on to meet one another. And please take a minute or so when it's your turn to introduce yourself and your affiliation, and briefly tell each other what your interests are in participating in this group. And next slide, we're gonna see how this works. So I don't have to call on you. Let's start with the column on the left, starting at the top, go down that column. Then after Josh, we'll start on the column on the right from the top. So Angelica, could you please start?
So I think Angelica couldn't be here, but so I'm Dominic. I work for Mako. Angelica is from the Maryland Municipal League, and both of us really have the same interest here. We both support local governments, and we just want to make sure that our interests are maintained.
Is Camille here? Okay, then Eliza.
Hello, I'm Eliza Cava, the Director of Conservation at Audubon Naturalist Society in the DC area. I'm also the co-chair of the Stormwater Partners Network of Montgomery County and serve on the Choose Clean Water Coalition Steering Committee and some stormwater work groups. So I mostly have a lot of expertise on the MS4 side, and I'm excited to learn more about what the new development requirements around quantity have that we can work on, because flooding is obviously a really huge deal. Thanks so much.
Hi, good morning all. I'm Eileen Craig. I'm the Stormwater Program Manager with the Nature Conservancy, the Maryland DC chapter. And previously to that, I worked as a design engineer consultant for about 10 years in the Maryland DC area. So I'm bringing both the side of being tasked to meet regulations in the past in Maryland, and then also this new hat from the environmental sector to just see what input I can give to help update the regulations. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Michael Daly. I am an architect and one of the appointed members of the Maryland Green Building Council here, kind of representing that group. Professionally, I have a practice that deals a lot with exterior envelope, waterproofing and water intrusion issues. And a lot of stuff that my firm does deals with this. We do a lot of green building work. So coupled with the Maryland Green Building Council and issues related to that group, I have a deep passion for some of the challenges we have with climate change, hence being here today. Thank you very much.
Is Marcia here? No. Okay. Pratik.
Good morning, everyone. This is Pratik. I'm the senior water resource engineer at HDR. I'm also the vice chair with CWA Stormwater Committee. So I'm primarily representing the CWA Stormwater Committee through this process, be the liaison between this stakeholder group and our CWA Stormwater Committee, and be representing them. Personally, my interest is in learning about what the regulation changes are coming up as part that will impact our site design and the stormwater management associated with that. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Jen Denninger. I'm a watershed restoration specialist with University of Maryland Sea Grant Extension. The team that I work on has 5 folks across the state, and our role is to help local governments, small communities, regulated and non-regulated localities to manage stormwater and to improve local water quality. So my interest here is to make sure that any regulation changes are going to be able to address those issues. I am based on the Eastern Shore, and I'm also a member of my town's planning commission, so I have an interest as well there.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Hine. I'm the director of the Department of Land and Resource Management for Carroll County. So our department is responsible for development review, which are all aspects of new development. We are also responsible for environmental compliance, reviewing for stormwater management and for floodplain management. And we also manage the county's NPDES permit. So this topic touches on a lot of the subject matter that it matters to our department. And then personally, I'm also an environmental engineer with about 30 years of experience doing stormwater management design. So this is a topic that's also near and dear to my heart. So thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Hoffman. I'm the Maryland Director for the Chesapeake Bay Commission. Some of you might not be familiar with the commission. It's a tri-state legislative commission. Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia works to share legislative ideas and policy to help advance watershed restoration. 2 of our members, Senator Elfreth and Delegate Love, were the lead sponsors of the legislation, and I'm here to in some ways represent them and to monitor the process and provide expertise and look at things, whether how things are going, or is there additional legislation or the regulatory process, how this is all moving forward. So, and also more additionally, how this all helps contribute to watershed bay watershed restoration. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. My name is Josh Kurtz. I'm the Maryland Executive Director of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. I'm here because stormwater is such an issue right now, and especially with climate change, the increases in precipitation, changes in hydrology, temperature really impacting water quality. Also really very pleased to hear kind of in Dr. Dorsey's kickoff talking about equity and understanding that we need to evaluate some of the communities that have been disproportionately impacted and will continue to be disproportionately impacted. So looking forward to continue to dig into that. Also, we work at the federal level, so making sure that we can help with any advocacy that might be needed related to funding that gets to the ground here in Maryland to help us tackle this issue. So looking forward to participating with everyone.
Hi, I'm Nicole Maccheroni. I'm the chair of the Maryland Association of Floodplain and Stormwater Managers. I'm also on the board of the Association of State Floodplain Managers and work for a consultant that conducts engineering mapping studies to update FEMA's flood maps. My personal expertise is in stakeholder engagement and partnership building, and I'm very interested in learning more about this effort to be able to reach back to the floodplain and stormwater management professionals in our Maryland Association of Floodplain and Stormwater Management Network and gather and share their insights with this group.
And good morning. I'm Lee McDonald, Chief of the Science Branch, working for EPA in the Chesapeake Bay Program Office, and here representing the Chesapeake Bay Program Office. I also have over 25 years of experience working with the PA Department of Environmental Protection, all that in the clean water programs. So I'm interested in trying to be helpful as you walk through this process. So good morning, all. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Karen Metchis. I retired from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency 3 years ago. I worked in the water program for a long time. I worked at the intersection of climate change and water resources, especially with respect to EPA's programs, including NPDES, et cetera. I currently am active on the Montgomery County Climate Action Plan Coalition, promoting actions in our county on adaptation, sequestration, as well as mitigation. And I'm a member of the Stormwater Partners Network. And I also have done some contract work for NOAA on these topics, and happy to answer more questions in the future. Thank you.
I'm Eric Michelson. I am the Deputy Director in the Anne Arundel County Department of Public Works, heading the Bureau of Watershed Protection and Restoration. I'm also one of the MACO representatives on the group. We are involved in administering the county's MS4 permit, and we work closely with our Department of Inspections and Permits, who does development review and approval for stormwater management activities. And we're increasingly involved in activities focused on climate resilience and safe flood conveyance as well. So I'm looking forward to continued conversations with the group.
Hi, I'm Jen Nelson. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Association of Soil Conservation Districts, and our interest in participating in this group stems from the fact that the conservation districts provide technical assistance to developers and engineers in reviewing grading and sediment control plans. And so our experiences can help feed into sort of the effectiveness of this work, and we'll also be practitioners using the deliverables from this work group as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Neugebauer. I'm a civil engineer with Morrison Ritchie Associates. We work primarily for land developers developing subdivisions and commercial projects. So our interest is how these new regulations are going to affect how we develop sites. Personally, I have over 25 years experience designing all kinds of stormwater facilities. And I think I'm one of the few engineers that actually goes out in some of these large storm events to see how these facilities are functioning and see how much water is actually coming out of them. So I'm looking forward to working with everybody and bringing my experience to the group. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Trey Porter. I work with Queen Anne's County Department of Public Works. I'm the chief reviewer for stormwater management, also floodplain and some other environmental features. I'm on the Eastern Shore, so I'm really interested in bringing back some quantity management that's sorely lacking in our area. I'm just up the road from Jennifer, who spoke earlier. My county faces a lot of unique challenges in terms of coastal flooding, sea level rise challenges, various coastal resiliency issues. Plus, we also have rainfall flooding as well. So we're at the convergence of a lot of different types of flooding. We have a lot of vulnerable communities. My background is basically I started out as a designer making the ponds back in the late 90s or mid late 90s. I've seen ponds work effectively and then also not effectively. I've seen ESD work effectively and then not be adequate to handle some of the quantity issues that we face. So I'm anxious and looking forward to contributing and trying to index stormwater management on some projected rainfalls, or at least something a little bit more recent than 1958. So I'm excited to be here. It's great to see some familiar faces and looking forward to contribute. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Casey Reed. I'm here at the request of and to represent the interests of the Maryland Building Industry Association. In my day job, I'm a licensed professional engineer for Rogers Consulting. Much like Tom, I spent my entire career implementing Maryland stormwater management regulations within private land development projects. I've been doing that since 2001. So I'm on my second version of regulations at this point. Certainly interested in making sure understanding how any regulation changes are going to affect the building industry, taking that information back to the association and educating our members on those changes.
Good morning. I'm Stu Schwartz. I'm a senior research scientist at the Center for Urban Environmental Research and Education at UMBC here in Catonsville, Maryland. I think my interests, broadly speaking, are in ways of bringing our best available science and our understanding of the science and uncertainty into regulatory criteria that have to set sharp lines in the sand that demarcate compliance from non-compliance. And I'm especially interested in reliability-based design and the performance that comes from tying design to so-called design storms and other frequency and risk-based issues. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Stevens. I'm with Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection. I'm a section chief within the Watershed Restoration Division. And I do a lot of work with the MS4, NPDES regulations, water quality. But we are moving gradually into more of the flood management realm as we begin to study it in Montgomery County and understand climate change, dealing with flood adaptations, mitigation. So I'm here representing our county to understand the regulations and how the state is moving forward to adapt to our changing climates and to deal with mitigation as much as possible. Very happy to be here and looking forward to the work we're doing.
Hi, my name is Emily Clifton. I'm here on Neil Weinstein's behalf today. We work together at the Low Impact Development Center. I am an environmental planner and scientist. We work a lot with local governments on a variety of projects, including nuisance flood planning, watershed planning, obviously LID Center. We started exclusively as water quality issues, but definitely in the past 5 or 6 years, in working with local communities, these water quality issues have been increasingly important to address. So I'd say our primary interests are from the watershed planning aspect, the use of more holistic stormwater management tools, and making sure that that modeling for upland issues is incorporated into these watershed plannings. We've been utilizing that more ourselves and are still learning, but see a great value and benefit to the local governments.
Michael Wyan, City of Gaithersburg. I work in Public Works, the stormwater program, and my primary interest is just to make sure that we have equitable, cost-effective, and resilient stormwater infrastructure for all of the people of Gaithersburg. So that's what I kind of keep in mind when I'm listening to this. Thanks.
Thanks to all of you. So I think there's 2 more slides about next steps, but we can hold those and go through some more questions. We have plenty of time. So Karen, go ahead.
Great. Hey, thank you. So since we're not meeting till October to hear some more details, I hope that in your conversations you'll address the already urbanized area, which is more difficult to deal with since they've already got such extensive built environment and underground infrastructure. It seems like most ESD is site by site, so it doesn't really address the cumulative flow that affects people downstream. And also it's in these urbanized areas where most waivers occur that undercuts not just quality, but quantity management. And of course, to do all that in an equitable way, or at least to provide funding for those. So I hope that you'll consider not just site by site in terms of, managing, but policy options for looking at the topography of flow that, so you're not just relying on the individuals at the site level to do what needs to be done. So I hope that's part of your deliberation. Thank you.
You want to go ahead, Rick? Go ahead.
Yeah, Karen, thank you. I think you raised numerous points and very good points. And I think that the way to get at this is when we talk about watershed studies. You are right. Our stormwater regulations are not for existing development, and a lot of our problems are in existing developed areas. What good watershed planning and watershed studies can do for us is identify those areas, prioritize areas that need work. And this is where the BRIC funding and other federal funding programs and state funding programs can come in. So through new regulations, and for new development, including that new information on development into the watershed plan, have a living document, not a watershed plan that sits on a shelf, but a living model, a living document that evolves over time. Virginia Beach has done this. And I think watershed studies and plans are the answer. Probably not something that we can do immediately. This is going to be a little bit longer term, but we are actively pursuing funding these programs, trying to figure out a way to fund these programs. And that may be, an ask of this group of how we can do that within the state framework better, because with these studies, we'll make the best decisions as to what capital improvement projects need to happen in those older urban areas. Jennifer, did you want to add anything to that?
Only that, and I think you probably said this, but it's a comprehensive approach. And what we're proposing here is a combination of new development regulations, redevelopment regulations, but also analyzing and understanding the problems, knowing where they're happening, why they're happening, developing the solutions, and all of that will happen most likely outside of a regulations discussion. It'll happen through the studies, and the studies hopefully will develop potential solutions, and the solutions are going to be all kinds of solutions, from capital projects, acquisitions, flood warning systems, public education. It's a comprehensive approach, and we know that is our vision. This group is going to be focused, at least initially, on just the new development regulations piece, but just know it in the back of your mind that we have that full vision.
And throw in that laundry list, incentives and funding programs. Thank you.
Okay, and back to the chat from Jen Dininger. In the A-Storm report on page 3, there's a sentence saying MDE will work with local jurisdictions to more consistently define flooding events as used in the statute. What is the plan or process for this, and how can we be helpful with that?
I can start. That's a difficult question. Consistently defining flooding. And I think after we wrote that report, we realized that it isn't as easy as it sounds. Ray did mention in his presentation that we have an initial data set of flooding events that we've gathered from NOAA data. And we will be reaching out to local jurisdictions to ask them to ground truth it and add any additional data that they have on flooding events. But as far as consistent definition, I'm not sure we're there yet, and certainly any suggestions or assistance with that is welcome.
Okay. Next question from Trey: is the increase in PE from 2.7 to 3.0 arbitrary or based on a study? Keep in mind that very few designs use 2.7 inches since it is reduced based on percent impervious. I'm not sure that this is the volume capture local regulators are looking for. This is basically all we have on the Eastern Shore.
I'll go ahead and take a crack, Jennifer. Yes, the 2.7 to 3.0 is based on a study. It's based on the RAND Corporation, and numerous universities participated in that projected Atlas 14 out 50 and 100 years based on numerous scenarios. This is the type of information that we're going to be providing to you as the supporting science behind doing this. In the October meeting, we'll go into this much more in depthly, and we'll be getting you materials before then as well. And a lot of this information, a really good resource is the A-Storm Hub. If you look at the series of regional meetings that we presented in April, that was an hour and a half of mostly technical talk. So if that's what you want, that's a really good place to kind of dig into that a little bit. One of the things that we're discussing, and we haven't discussed yet, but we're looking into that the 2.7 to 3 inches would affect, is all of our designs are based on the 24-hour storm event, but we're starting to look at the shorter duration storm events. And some of those shorter duration storm events of 2, 3, 4 hours, that 3 inch, capturing that 3 inches, we're beginning to show where we can capture a 10-year storm or a 25-year storm in a 25-year storm, 4-hour duration in some regions of the state. And we're going to be presenting this. We're developing this information now. We'll be presenting this to you. But you know, we need to stop. We need to start thinking more in these shorter duration storm events, which is the cause of a lot of flooding. Thank you.
Okay, next from Karen: will the new regs address the practice of granting ESD waivers, especially in urban areas?
I can say that waivers are part of our regulations, so certainly our regulations should address waivers, any regulatory changes. And I don't believe that this has been a topic yet under discussion with the Regulations Technical Advisory Group. Because we spend 2 hours, and you can imagine a bunch of engineers who specialize in these designs. They can go down some rabbit holes and end up not getting too far. So waivers haven't come up yet, but waivers and grandfathering are two topics that this, not only the Regulations Technical Advisory Group will need to get into, but will most likely have to come to you all with those discussions as well.
Okay, from Jim, it's back to managing back to, I think. He says, as I understand it, the concept is that volume control upstream is conditioned on downstream conveyance capacity. So I think he just needs a yes or no.
I think that is one idea, but unintended consequences of that also need to be discussed. And again, I think it needs to be a comprehensive approach. In some cases, you're not going to be able to manage to the capacity of the downstream system. There's going to have to be some other additional techniques that are proposed. And I always use Ellicott City as my example when I'm thinking about this stuff. What they're doing in Ellicott City is not just new development regulations, it's new development regulations. It's upgrading the conveyance system as much as they can. It's providing regional quantity management where as much as they can. It's acquisitions where they've done as much as they can, and now they can possibly acquire flooded structures. And then they've got the warning system as well. So it's that whole comprehensive approach.
Okay, and from Eric, does MDE envision potentially loosening the rules around ESD to the MEP? For example, allowing an easier use of structural practices as a means to achieve these goals?
Eric, that's a good question. And I'd like to maybe think about it slightly differently. We seem to draw this line between ESD and structural controls for quantity management, ESD for quality management. And, as part of our MS4 permitting effort, what we've really tried to do is how can we take some of these structural controls, maybe larger quantity management type structures, and how can we add green infrastructure into them through landscaping plans, through sinuosity, through forebay designs, things of that nature, so that basically we're greening up, some of these structural practices as well. So it's not either or, it's trying to, bring the green infrastructure and the water quality benefits. So along with that, the ESD practices, we can take a look at the sizing of them, and if maybe there are slightly larger structures that can be very green as well, and use them for both quality control and quantity management. That is something that this group should be thinking about.
I'm going to add to that. There have been discussions with the building industry, in particular with residential properties, residential subdivisions, and ESD practices, potentially increasing the minimum sizes for some of these ESD practices to allow more of a practice on a common area as opposed to one or two every single lot. Those discussions have been separate from this effort, but it's not that doesn't mean that they couldn't, that thought process of, as Ray said, changing some of the minimum sizing criteria couldn't be incorporated into this effort with A-StoRM.
Okay, and the reaction from Eric was, I would love to see that line blurred. So it sounds like we're on the same page, thanks. And then a related comment, I think, from Eliza, just wanted to point out that ESD has great value and co-benefits. Going back to an era of big dry ponds and mainly structural practices could present some risk of losing the benefits of wildlife habitat, urban greening, shade, etc. that ESD provides. So appreciates that we can include water quality features even in new quantity treatment projects.
I think that it's important, again, to go back to the watershed. It might make sense in some places to blur that line, as Eric says, but in others, it's not necessary. So, I think it really depends on the downstream watershed and at the conditions of the conveyance system, and whether it's a fully urbanized or it's, a new development out somewhere way out where we've got a lot of open space. I think it's going to make a difference, and that's where the watershed studies are going to be very important.
Okay, and I know where we are on the agenda, but I think we have so few questions left. I'd like to continue with the questions. So from Amy, is the regulatory tack evaluating regulations, stormwater management designed to address the more intense, shorter duration, several hours, not 24-hour, 12-hour storms?
I can speak to this. We haven't gotten into that discussion yet, but it is definitely going to be on the agenda. Obviously, these are the storms that are causing a lot of the problems. So we need to certainly think about whether we need to broaden our criteria from just the 24-hour design storm to some of these shorter duration, high intensity storms.
And we touched on this a little bit, but by moving the 2.7 inches for ESD up to 3 inches, we're beginning to see that we can begin to capture some of these shorter duration, larger storms. This is all a process of modeling it to see how far we can get with that, maybe before we need to, put something into a larger facility. So yes, this is the purpose of this group and the evolution of this group. And we've got some charts that Stu Comstock has been working on, again, that show how some of these shorter duration, but 10, 25, 50-year storms, how the 3 inches can capture some of that volume to prevent flooding. We'll discuss this more.
Okay, and comment from Karen, it would be beneficial to have someone on this stakeholder group representing the landscaping sector, people who need to promote and install green infrastructure. There's a shortage of knowledgeable landscapers in this arena. So appreciate that comment. And that's all I see in the chat. So next slide, please. So just a reminder of next steps for the stakeholder consultation group. Well, first of all, let me mention that everyone here today, members of the stakeholder group, as well as members of the public, will get a link to the recording and a follow-up email from MDE through the Hughes Center. The stakeholder group will get some draft regulations in September. Then we'll meet again virtually in mid to late October to go over the draft rules with you. Then your comments, we think, will be due in November. In the spring, we'll do a formal promulgation, including public review and comment. Next slide. For our public participants, you'll be notified of the October meeting. In the spring, you'll have an opportunity to review and comment on the draft regulations. And again, you can check that A-StoRM hub for any new information. And we're a little ahead of schedule. Next slide. This was the last slide. So if you have any comments or questions that you'd like to add now, we have a few minutes. Raise your hand or write something in the chat. I'll be quiet while you think. Jen.
Thanks, Kathy. To Karen's point about the landscape professionals, we are partners in a program called the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professionals Program. Beth Ginter is the executive director there, and it's run through Chesapeake Conservation Landscaping Council. If there's interest in looking for a green infrastructure landscape professional to participate as a stakeholder group, I can connect you or whoever to Beth, and either Beth can think about her participation timing, or she might be able to suggest a practitioner who's out in the field. Just a suggestion.
Thank you for the offer.
Kathy, I wanted to just say one thing about the schedule, the next step schedule. I want to make sure you will all understand that it's not a this is not a one and done kind of process. We're not going to come to you in October, say, here are our proposals, vote on them, and then we're going to see you later. This is, as we said, as Ray said, quantity management, those discussions are going to be long-term discussions. I think we'll probably be coming to you in October with 2 proposed regulation changes, but I can't imagine that there's not going to be a lot of discussion with just those 2. And then on top of that, the quantity management proposals will be coming later on. So I'm hoping that you all recognize that this isn't, that we're going to be looking for your participation beyond October. We don't have don't think we have today information to tell you when and how much beyond October. But I just want to put that out there because I didn't want it to sound like we're asking you, hey, make comments once and then thank you, and we'll see you later.
I would also like to add to that. Got a lot of great questions today. And I think we've got a really good group here, stakeholder group here. And a lot of people want to see the science behind some of these decisions that we're making. And if we need to have additional meetings, if you all think that it would be a good idea to really get down into the nuts and bolts and the weeds of all of the science behind the technical changes, we can do that. We can have a special session. There's nothing written in the law that says we just need to have 2 meetings. We were going to try to gauge things in October, and maybe we can still leave it there, plan on the October meeting. And then after that, if you all feel like you need additional technical meetings, we can do that as well. So just let us know your thoughts on that as well.
Okay, and Karen, a quick comment or question?
Yeah, well, so in October, you're coming to us with 2 proposals on dealing with new development on water quality only, or maybe you could clarify what you're coming to us with. And maybe like Jennifer, you said that, so there'll be other proposals. Can you maybe send us something that lays out a game plan? Maybe you don't know the exact timing, but sort of the sequence of the kinds of things you'll address. So just to manage our expectations on what we think we're going to be addressing. Is that possible?
Yeah, we can do that. And I think Ray presented something in his slides, but I think since we have had this conversation today, we can update that. To answer your question about the October meeting, we will be providing you some written information prior to October, but October our plans right now are to discuss the precipitation values, updating the precipitation values, and discussing updating the ESD volume from 2.7 inches to 3 inches. So those are the 2 proposals we will be bringing to you in October. We'll have some background discussion. We'll show you we have a number of data charts. We can show you sort of some of the discussion on the implications of implementing those 2 requirements or regulation changes. And then we can also put together a potential future, I guess, outline. I don't know if we'll have dates yet, but at least an outline of other topics that we think we'd be bringing to this group.
Yes, something that perhaps represents your, for lack of a better word, systems thinking about all the components of the problem and how you're going to incrementally address it. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you to all the participants. Thank you especially to the Hughes Center for hosting. In respect for everyone's time, I'll now conclude this meeting and we'll stop recording and we'll see you soon. Thank you.